Let me share screen. All righty, can everybody see that okay, I assume? Yep. Welcome everybody. It is what, September 15th, and this is the Cluster API Kubernetes SIG Cluster Lifecycle Cluster API provider Azure office hours for September 15th. We meet here every week at this time on Thursdays. Since we're a CNCF project, we just ask people please to try to use the raise hands feature and be polite to each other. Not that we ever have any issues in this area, but it's part of our creed. Yeah, and if you wouldn't mind adding your name to the attendees list, it helps people identify each other and maybe network or solve problems later. Let's see, is there anybody here who's here for the first time and wants to say hello and welcome? I'll be quiet for just a second. I think everybody's looks like a veteran here, so. But if anybody wants to say anything, I'll give you a few seconds. All right. Just because I see milestone review here, I was thinking about it. We didn't actually yet open the test infra PR to enable a 1.6 milestone and have that be our main. So I was just doing that. So maybe we don't have milestone review today unless we want to start from scratch. But I think the process is you're supposed to open a test infra PR first, and then that'll create the milestone for us the proper way. So we can talk about that at the end, or we can just skip it for this meeting. I don't care. Let's get on to open discussion. Ashutosh, you want to talk about node outbound LB bug?
Yes, it was a small bug when the Azure cluster and cluster name is not same. So I mean, I have put more details on the issue. I've linked it. It's a little PR, and I think it's just up for review. And not sure, like, do we want to put a dot release into this, or wait for? I mean, Jack, or you can comment on that, because it kind of blocks provisioning of clusters for which Azure cluster name is not equals to the cluster name. Go ahead, Jack.
Yeah, I think we should. So I see that you addressed my one review feedback. Yeah, the tests are good. I think we should merge this and include this in the next cherry pick.
Cool.
So I will actually, I'll go ahead right now and just, I'm not sure if folks are aware, but you can identify a PR for cherry pick before it merges to main, which is actually, I would argue, the preferred approach, so that reviewers who are approving PRs to main can better sort of serialize things.
Sure.
So I'll do that right now.
Awesome. Thanks, Jack.
Yep. Thanks so much for the fix.
And yeah, and like Jack, I saw like one PR regarding the SSA markers, like the server side apply. And just like I was also following through that, and I feel free to I can help there, chime in if there is anything I can do if you're super busy.
Yeah, I can talk about that. I'll add that after John's agenda item, and I can kind of go through the extent which I am able to comprehend that.
Cool, makes sense.
Yeah, good call. Any other comments about this PR? It looks pretty straightforward at this point.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you. John, yeah, you want to follow up on last week's AKS preview features discussion?
Yeah. So last week when we talked about adding AKS preview features to Azure managed clusters, I think now would probably be a good time to settle on a priority for that. So I get the sense from the input that folks have given already that overall AKS preview features are definitely worth adding. I guess where I would need help is I'm not sure exactly how best to express the priority for this. But I can imagine some things like tests, bugs, and AKS GA features would probably be higher priority than preview features. So does anybody else have any other opinions about how we should go about this, or what we should prioritize above or below preview features? Jack, go ahead.
Cool. So my take on this is that this is epic-ish, and I would think that to the extent that we can continue to move this forward, kind of with, say, 60% of the assignees' focus, and then allow a little bit of overhead for other sort of more near-term pressing items to be worked on. So if you're going to work on this, which would be amazing, some arrangement like that would make the most sense. So from a priority standpoint, I would say this is from a medium-term standpoint, this is probably about as high of a priority as I can imagine for folks, but it's not something that we can turn around in really a month. This is probably a 3-month effort. So if you were to work on this, I would advise you not to work on any other epic, because this should properly take up your focus. But I don't think that we would want to have an arrangement where this prevents you from working on anything else that's not an epic, if that makes sense. Does anybody else have any thoughts? Mike, I know you were interested in this. Do you have any, does that sound about right to you? How important does this seem to you? You're muted, Mike, sorry.
I lowered my hand, but I didn't unmute myself. I'm torn on this one. Because it is preview features, I feel like it's somewhat of a lower priority, but at the same time, I really want like bring your own CNI. So I kind of feel selfish in saying that, a higher priority from that perspective. So I think that if we had a kind of maybe a slightly higher priority is kind of building out the framework to allow people to do this. And that would allow, people who needed this functionality to bring it themselves. So, I could have a teammate of mine say, hey, yeah, we want this, come in, here's the framework that's in place to do a preview feature, go ahead and do it. Even if they're not kind of a core maintainer, core part of the community, they can come in and bring in that preview feature without having to build the whole groundwork of using preview features. But I don't know that it's enough of a priority to say we're building out all these preview features before all these other GA features are completed. I would think the GA stuff should come first.
Yeah, that's great feedback. Anyone else have any thoughts? To be clear, my sort of characterization of what's valuable for this in the medium term is the additional API itself, and not necessarily any one or more of these preview features per se. What I see is that the longer we don't have a way to expose preview features in AKS, there's just a sort of baked in risk that our Azure Managed Cluster customers aren't going to need these preview features. But I suspect that will change at some point, and that a feature will land that's preview that's deemed to be extremely valuable. And then we're in a position where we literally have no way to expose those features because we haven't done the engineering work to lay that surface. So that's the sort of priority work that I would like to see, is to see that surface laid, and maybe just a couple of works of exploratory, like practical exploratory effort to just make sure that our idea of the scope of it is correct. I think that John and I and Cecile and some other folks have gone through a kind of intellectual exercise of imagining how this could happen. And so we have a decent idea that it's feasible and how much work it might cost. I said earlier, 3 months or so. But I think we're at the point where those intellectual assumptions need to be tested with a little bit of just rolling up the sleeves and poking around. Does that make sense, Mike?
Sorry, go ahead.
So I agree with you 100% that, and we can make this clear in the issue, that really this issue is to expose the that preview API, which as far as I can tell is more or less, I mean, this needs some exploratory work as well, but as far as I can tell, it's feature compatible with the GA API. So maybe the scope of that work could be the equivalent of turning on your preview, like if you're using the CLI, just running that command that basically enables the preview API, which essentially redirects your AZ AKS calls. I'm thinking of the CLI here, to the preview API, but the existing interface with the GA API, as far as I can tell, is it might not be 100% compatible, but it's very close to 100% compatible. So you can use GA features against the preview API as far as I understand. So that could be the scope, is to just allow the preview API in CapZ. You can declare it somewhere in your spec with no additional features. And then the preview features can probably be implemented like we're doing now with GA features according to customer priority and our own sense of priority. I know there was a lot to take notes. Was that sort of clearish for folks? Just my thoughts.
Well, tell me if I summarized it correctly. I was kind of stream of consciousness there.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I was the stream of consciousness source, trust me.
I want to give James a chance to talk. He had his hand up.
Oh yeah, go James.
Cool. Yeah, so just looking at the issue, it looks like you have to swap out the entire API. You can't just like enable a single feature or something. You have to completely swap out the API. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
You can imagine how it works under the hood, where there's literally a discrete SDK API version that is capable of doing these features.
Yeah, when I just today was the first day I saw it, I was thinking that it was going to be much simpler than that, because you just kind of make that one API call, but looks like you have to use the whole thing under the hood, which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible that that if John starts working on it, that he'll prove that wrong, and it is easier than we think. But from I mean, John, do you have any thoughts? How confident are you that it's going to require a new API?
I mean, I think using the whole API is probably going to be the simplest way to get started anyway. But yeah, I'm not sure if there are ways where we can try to isolate things further than that.
Yeah, the easiest test is just to literally go through the SDK and look for preview features, and you just won't see it in the GA API versions. They don't exist. So that's the matriculation process. So that's when as an AKS customer, you like wire your client environment to enable preview features, you're essentially, redirecting where your underlying API endpoint's going to go to when it makes those AKS requests.
Is that clear as mud, John?
Yeah, I think so. So yeah, I think I'll take on this effort for now, at least, and then so yeah, I can start kind of fleshing out what the API might look like, and I'll definitely make sure to ask for feedback on that. So stay tuned. Yeah, that's all I had for this. Does anybody else have any last thoughts?
Nope. All right, great. I'm really glad we're talking about. I'm really glad you brought this up, because clearly the demand is there, and we've been kind of not heading it face on. Jack, do you want to talk about SSA?
Yeah, just really quickly. So what's the best way to, I'm going to link some docs.
Just look at the PR, actually makes it somewhat clear,
Yeah,
I thought.
the PR has some docs, which, you know, click and then click to get to what server-side apply really means. This is essentially a Kubernetes API feature that's been stable since 122. And CAPI 1.2 enables this, which allows for more atomic operations against sets of things. I'm gonna go with things. So that subnet spec up there, yeah, that was actually a good, or that right there, yeah. But yeah, line 140 in types.go, you can see that this PR hasn't been merged because we're not, the set of folks who are here, basically Cecile's still on vacation. I'd like to get her thoughts before we merge this, because it will have a change in behaviors. But that subnets type up there is the type of atomic sort of resource set that is subject to edge conditions when not using what Kubernetes called server-side apply. And so those decorations that are added as part of this PR are essentially pragmas that instruct the server-side apply functionality how to uniquely operate against items in that set. So in this case, the set is an array of subnet spec atomically. So what we're doing essentially is telling the server-side apply what type of data set it is. So that's what the list type equals map. And the key is the unique key. So this allows sort of deterministic exclusive access to items in that set. So when there are multiple controllers operating concurrently across items in that set, they can essentially take out exclusive locks on particular items. So without this pragmas, when you have CRDs that are being mutated concurrently by multiple controllers, as you can imagine, the atomic transaction is indeterminate. So as one controller, I start operating against one item in that set. I do some work, and I then update the set with the updated item. Another controller may be operating on that same item or a different item in that set, and without any sort of way to synchronize those behaviors as discrete atomic transactions, you can imagine one of those is going to win the race, and the resultant subnets set is going to reflect only one of those changes and not the sort of rationally merged atomic combination of both of those operations. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm a poor computer science teacher at a JC or something trying to describe this conceptually. So the TLDR is that we don't understand, we're not confident without some more thoughts from Cecile, maybe some folks from CAPI. This was identified by Cluster API itself, so it was very, very generous of them to actually do an audit of our code as they were implementing the server-side apply functionality in 1.2. And they identified subnets as being the only thing. There was another, as you can see, there's actually, this was quite a stream of stuff, but there's another type addition there under VNet peering's template spec, and I think there may be one more. So essentially, I identified the properties that are set properties. I think Yassine and some other folks in CAPI did some more auditing and identified that subnets is the only one that is subject to multiple controller operations. So that's really the conditions under which you need to worry about this.
Were we seeing any, or were they seeing any bugs due to this? Or?
We've been using 1. So this shipped with 1.2 of CAPI, and CapZ, I did the work so I can speak to it. CapZ pinned to 1.2 a couple months ago, 6 weeks maybe so. And I think the easiest answer is that we just don't have test signal for this particular race condition. So I don't think that we know whether or not the code is subject to it. So we definitely want to test it given that lack of knowledge. And then perhaps work with CAPI to this is the kind of thing that would probably be a combination of functional and end testing. I mean, it's pretty low level, but obviously fairly nasty. So you want to make sure that we're doing this in the right way.
Ashutosh, go ahead.
No, just want to add on what Jack said. James, this bug, actually we will face the bug if we start to use CAPI with server-side apply on cluster class. So this essentially happens on cluster class when we have Azure cluster template, and there we can specify those subnets. So what happens is once the CAPG reconciler works, they actually pull in other couple of details like CIDR block and stuff like that, and writes it back to that subnet slice. But once it is done, the CAPI topology controller will still say, okay, there is a diff, and it will update it back. So essentially, there are two things. One is having ownership of that particular ID or that particular field in the subset. So let's say you have a list and one of the items in the list have 4 or 5 fields. By using like managed fields, we can say that this is what is being owned by CAPI, and they actually send the entire intent to SSA API. So to do that, the SSA API should be able to identify, whether I should be adding this list, whether I should be merging it or not. So for that, we need a unique ID to actually, enable this. So that's how this markers help there.
Ashutosh, do you feel confident that you're able to actually observe this?
I have not personally actually tried it, but I think I'll try it, and this issue will happen. But yeah, I have not like tried it, so I'll get back onto this. I think I'll try to deploy a cluster class. So provisioning is not blocked, so you will end up creating a cluster, but it will just oscillate. Like this is what I think will happen, because this happened with CAPE. Because CAPI topology controller will continuously start to patch it. Yeah, but I'll get back on this. I think it should be pretty quick to test it. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. And if you could comment on, so there's if you could go back to the change set, Matt, there, I'm going to go a little bit deep at this point. So we essentially tried to mimic Kappa's solution to this. So I think this is solved in Kappa, at least at Main. I'm not sure if they've released. And that's what you see in the cluster API docs that as an example of what providers must do when adopting 1.2. The problem with Azure is that this subnet, so you see that list map key equals role. So if you're able to comment on your confidence in how that can be used from CAPSI's perspective as a unique, or really from CAPSI's perspective as a unique key. It's not the unique key from the perspective of the underlying data type, but we can't use the unique key from the underlying data type because we passively consume it from Azure. And so the CRD generator has rules that don't allow you to use a value of list map key with a property that's either read-only or not required. And so the way we kind of hack around that in CAPZ when we create subnets is we pass the subnet spec to Azure, and then in the payload response we get with the 201, we then update our representation of the data type with the authoritative information from Azure. And we define the front end spec of this data type. Like you can see, if you look at that, you go drill down to that subnet spec, you can see that the ID property is marked as read-only. So from a user-facing point of view, it's read-only, and the generator code doesn't like a list map key value with a property that's read-only. So that's if we were able to do that, we would have already merged it because that makes perfect sense. So we're trying to find a user, basically a required user accessible value that in fact expresses the sufficient amount of uniqueness where this would work. And we think that there's only one role per, so in that set, there's only going to be one subnet for a given role. not confident about that. Go ahead, Ashutosh.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we'll have only one role because we can have like multiple machine deployments, right? But
well, the
in
main
node
question is,
subnet?
can you have? I think for control plane, there's only going to be one control plane subnet. That's just baked into the architecture. I'm less sure about the node role type. Are there? Does it make sense on a single cluster to have multiple subnets, each with the role of node? I think it's node is the allowed value.
Yeah, like I don't know. I feel like we can have it. Like we should be doing it or not. I don't know, but if I'm not wrong, I think we can have like multiple subnets with role node. Like, correct me otherwise.
Cool. Well, then we can probably experiment with composing the value to list map key from a set of properties. That's also possible, but I haven't gone down that combinatoric route yet in this PR.
Oh, okay. So what I'll do is I'll just try to test it out, and I'll take a look at your PR and also see if there is anything I can comment on that. Let me take a look at that. Thank you for doing this, Jack.
Yep. Thanks for testing.
Mike,
I'm pretty sure that we only allow you to do the one role per one role name per thing. So you can't have the same role name for more than one subnet.
okay. I'm not sure about that, Mike. So
yeah, and I would want to make sure that we might be doing that, but maybe it's possible that we shouldn't be doing that, and if that were the case, then that would not be the correct. So like maybe in the future, an orthogonal work effort would be like, oh, I need multiple node subnets, and we're like, cool, we can do that. We'll just remove the webhook validation that prevents that, and then we've now broken this in a way that's really hard to correlate. So I want to make sure we get this right.
Yeah, the validation definitely doesn't allow it, but you're right, it may be allowed in other ways.
Like architecturally, it may be defensible that someone would construct a cluster with that composition,
cool.
Thank you. I got a question. So we've entered in 1.2 a long time ago, but we never clued into this until recently. Does that point to a gap in E2E tests? Do we not? We do have a cluster class test, at least through CAPI, but we never triggered this bug as far as I can tell. Does that mean we have E2E gaps we need to fill?
Add it to the list of gaps. Yes.
Well, yeah.
I think the answer is yes. Do you say
there's
no,
a specific one we know about,
honest.
so we can't put our fingers in our ears and. Sorry,
Matt, are you talking about the bug of like this particular stuff that we're talking about?
The potential race condition bug we're talking about fixing here with the SSA. We've never seen it as far as I know in the wild. That probably means we're not testing some cluster class dry run something or other, right?
Yeah. Also, so I don't know
it's
like
a race condition. Maybe it doesn't happen very often. I don't know.
But it actually does not impact any functionality. Like just to be clear, like you can very much successfully provision a cluster, a workload cluster, and do other day-to-day operations. But it's just that there is a lot of patch going on.
Yeah, I was going to say, does it basically de-optimize the reconciliation for this particular? Yeah, that kind of makes it. So you're saying that the race, well, maybe I didn't describe it well, because that wasn't my understanding. So we want to get clarity on that. I described it in a different way where updates to that subnet's resource are going to be, concurrent updates are going to be, only one will win that race. And so one update in that concurrent set will be, one or more will be dropped depending on how much concurrency we're talking about. So if that's not true, and it's more like just thrashing, it's not able to determine that there's no diff essentially when it's doing its reconciliation, then that is that's something we would want to fix, and we could write a test to detect that kind of thrashing.
And but it's because it's always in patch requests, so it really never fails. So topology controller from CAPI succeeds patching it, and then the CAPZ controller also succeeds patching it, because it is the CAPZ controller sees that I should actually fill in the values that it gets from Azure APIs.
That makes sense. So it might manifest just as the cluster seems to work, but under the covers, there's a lot of thrashing going on that's not necessary patching,
Yeah.
perhaps.
Let me point to the similar AWS bug, if that gives little clarity to us. I have pasted it on chat. Like I expect something similar to happen with CAPZ, but yeah, I'll test it.
Thank you very much for following up there. Cool, that's the end of the agenda. What else do people want to talk about? Yeah, Ashutosh.
Anybody in KubeCon? Like I'll be attending KubeCon this time, so really excited to meet all of you.
Anyone?
That's awesome.
I'll be there.
I don't know exactly yet, which is a problem. And also probably predicts the answer is no. So there was a CAPI talk that was rejected and then later accepted, which means that you have to go to your management chain at the last minute and get a budget approval. So is anyone else going to KubeCon? James, are you going?
Yeah, I'll be there, and Cecile's going as well.
I'll be there as well.
Cool.
Cool. Excited to meet all of you in person.
Awesome. Wish I were going.
I hope to be there, but budget may not allow. We'll see.
All right, with that, I guess, unless anybody has anything last minute, we can call it a day for this meeting. All right, we'll see you all next week. Same time.
It's
Thanks.
going, y'all.
Thanks, Matt.
Gotcha.
Thank you. See you all. Bye.